And start recording. Good morning, everyone. My name is Diana Schulak. I'm from Family Focus Resource Center. I am the program manager. Actually, I've had to change a title. I'm director of operations now at Family Focus Resource Center. I work at the Cal State University Northridge office, but we also have offices in Antelope Valley, Santa Clarita, and Chatsworth. So you are here today to watch our workshop hosted by Disability Rights California. And today it's going to be assessments and reassessments. We will have a specific question and answer section at the end of the workshop. So please withhold your questions until then. If you do want to use the chat to put your question in so that you don't forget it, you are welcome to. So right now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Raymond from Disability Rights, and he can tell you a little bit more about Disability Rights California. Thank you, Raymond.
Thank you. Thank you again to Family Focus Resource Center for having us again. And thank you all the participants for being with us this morning. My name is Raymond. I am an advocate with Disability Rights California. So in case you're not familiar with who we are a statewide nonprofit, and we provide free legal services to people with disabilities, with any disability-related issues. So we have attorneys and advocates that work on different subject matters, such as access or discrimination with housing, with transportation, with education, which includes special education and higher education. We can also help with some employment reasonable accommodation issues, public health benefits, such as Medi-Cal, in-home supportive services, Social Security overpayment issue that relates to work. And within our agency, we also have different programs, examples of which is our Office of Client Rights Advocacy, or OCRA. They specialize in helping clients of the regional center, and our Client Assistance Program, or CAP. They specialize in helping clients of the Department of Rehabilitation. So everything you see today, the PowerPoint and any links and website that might be shared in the chat will be sent to you after the presentation. If you have any questions at all, that's you want to share and speak to one of our advocates one-on-one on your particular issue, more specifics, feel free to reach out to us. Our intake line is 800-776-5746, and our phones are open Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. If you call us outside those hours, you can leave us a message, and our advocates will get in touch with you as soon as possible. So without further ado, I'll introduce our presenter today, one of our attorneys, Daniel Hernandez. So feel free to take it away.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Like Raymond, my colleague, mentioned, my name is Daniel Hernandez. I use he, him pronouns. And today's topic is going to be preparing for an IHSS assessment or reassessment. But before we begin, we do want to provide a short disclaimer to the audience that the following presentation is meant for education only and doesn't constitute legal advice nor counsel. And that's because everyone's situation may be unique and require careful attention. And if that's the case, like Raymond mentioned, we welcome you to contact our intake line so you can be connected to an advocate that can provide that careful attention to your particular issue. Also, we want the audience to keep in mind that the information in this packet can become out of date in the future, and that's because the laws and local practices relating to these matters are constantly developing. So if at a point in the future, let's say 2 or 3 years from now, you happen to refer to this packet, some of the information may be incorrect at that point. There's a possibility. Okay, so I think we can go to the next page. And here we have a quick overview of what we'll be discussing today. During this presentation, we'll be reviewing various documents and information that can help you understand and prepare for an IHSS assessment or reassessment. Some of you were with us last week where we provided an overview of IHSS eligibility and the various services. So today we will be focusing on the assessment process of the application process, or if you're already receiving IHSS, the reassessment process. And so just we have a list of these topics here, right? So we'll go over the functional index ranking for adults, but also used for children. Functional index ranking for minor children, specifically the Vinland maturity scale, the hourly task guidelines, and those are all documents that social workers will use to determine what rank and what time will be given in any service for IHSS. We'll also go over a self-assessment template that a few of my colleagues developed to help families as they prepare for assessment. We also have an example of one of those assessments that was drafted. And at the end, we'll have a list of resources that you can check out if you want to learn more. Okay, for the next page. Okay, so now before I talk about the functional index ranking that you see here on the screen, I do want to explain a little bit about the role of assessments in the in-home supportive services program, or IHSS. So when you first apply for IHSS, that's part of the process. Part of the process for the county social workers is to do an in-home assessment, in addition to other things that need to be completed, such as filling out the application, doing an initial intake interview or call, completing forms like the healthcare certification form, all the form, specifically SOC 873. So the purpose of these in-home assessments is to determine the person's needs. And so the assessment includes a functional assessment or an analysis of the physical and mental condition of an individual that can then determine a person's ability to perform certain tasks or activities. So a social worker will take into account this home assessment or reassessment, if that's the case, the form submitted, and any additional documents that someone gives the county or the social worker when they calculate how many IHSS hours or time someone will receive. And again, if someone is already receiving IHSS services, this assessment is done annually, generally around the same time, the same month. And this is what's called a reassessment, the annual assessment. Something I will mention about assessments, however, is that one doesn't have to wait for an annual assessment to have it done, particularly if there's a significant change in a person's condition or a change in their circumstances. For instance, if a person moves homes, right, that can affect, sometimes favorably, right, the services that someone receives. In those cases, it can be requested at any time there's a change that can affect services. And let me provide an example of that, just to kind of help illustrate things. So let's say that a child has been receiving IHSS already for several years, and that child is now 16 years old. And at age 16, and let's say that there's 6 months left until the annual assessment or the reassessment. So let's say that at age 16, that child is diagnosed with diabetes. This means that their condition has changed and requires another assessment due to their new condition. They may need more service hours to prepare meals or to plan menus. They may even be able to get paramedical services if they need to have insulin injected. So in this example, it's not necessary to wait another 6 months for the annual assessment, since there was a change in the 16-year-old's condition. So an evaluation can be requested due to that change, due to the fact that the child is now diagnosed with diabetes. Okay. So just that as context. So the functional index ranking. So this refers to the levels or the ranges of a disability or an impairment, and the need for assistance that is required due to those levels or due to those ranks. Generally, a rank of 1 to 5 is used, as you can see here on this page, though there are 6 ranks. So based on the home assessment and other information, an IHSS social worker assigns a rank in each service category under the IHSS program, right? Things like feeding, meal preparation, dressing, bowel bladder care. So a social worker will assign a rank. So according to the agency, right, that oversees the IHSS program across all counties in California, the California Department of Social Services, or CDSS, they've provided a description of these various ranks 1 through 6, and I'll read them for you here. So rank 1, independent. So that means that a person is able to perform a function without human assistance, meaning they can do something independently. They don't need any help. A rank of 2 means that a person is able to perform a task or a function, but needs verbal assistance, such as reminding, guiding, or encouragement. So prompting, the individual needs prompting to help complete a task. A rank of 3 means that a person can perform the function with some human assistance. That includes, but is not limited to, direct physical assistance from a person. A rank of 4 means that a person can perform a function with only substantial human assistance. They need more than just physical assistance, some physical assistance, or prompting, verbal assistance. They need more. And then here, rank 5, which is on the other end of the spectrum, means that the person cannot perform the function at all, with or without human assistance. They need complete care. Now, rank of 6 is a little different. Rank of 6 means that a person requires paramedical services, which are services generally prescribed by a licensed healthcare professional, like a doctor. And these are services, if you remember from last week, if you were here with us last week, these are services that require certain type of training or judgment to perform, and they're typically prescribed or ordered by a doctor. An example we mentioned last week was the use of insulin, which is a service that requires training to administer and is generally ordered by a doctor. So for people applying for IHSS, a worker will typically assign a rank from 1 to 5. If a rank of 1 is assigned, the person will not receive hours under that service category because it's assumed that the person can do that task independently. For example, if we have someone who is 20 years old, let's say with a developmental disability, and that 20-year-old can dress themselves without assistance, they can do it without any help, the rating would be a rank of 1. And they will not receive any hours under the dressing of the category of dressing. And then just kind of as a reminder of some of these different IHSS services or tasks, we have domestic services, household chores, right? Laundry, meal preparation, meal cleanup, bowel and bladder care, feeding, dressing, ambulation, bathing, oral hygiene, and grooming. So those are just a few of those various services that can be provided. Okay, go to the next page. And here you'll see that a lot of these pages will have a link to these documents that the county or social workers rely on when doing these assessments. So let's now go over the functional index ranking for minor children, where the rankings are function a little bit differently, right? Social workers don't simply ascribe a rank between 1 to 5, right? There's other considerations that they take into account, or suggestions, I should say, that they take into account. And one of these is what you see here in front of you, which is a functional index ranking for minor children, or the age-appropriate guidelines. So for children or individuals that are 17 years of age or younger, IHSS social workers use this specific guide or this tool to assess how they're going to provide a rank or a functional index rank. So you can see on the chart here. So the first column shows ages from infancy to 17 years of age. And if you see each column afterward, it represents a category of services under the IHSS program, for example, housework, laundry, shopping and errands, so on and so forth. So the various numbers under each of these columns represents a rank that is suggested to be assigned, which is typically between 1 and 5. So for each age, a social worker will look at the corresponding service and age, and they'll be suggested that they assign a corresponding rank under each of the services. So let's use an example. Let's say we have a child. Let's say the child's name is Pablo, who's 6 years old. And a social worker wants to use this guide to assign a rank for the category of dressing. First, we start in the column, the first column, and we go down to 6, right? Because the individual is 6 years old. So if we move to the right, under the dressing category, the guide indicates that the rank can be between 1 and 5. So we know a social worker is suggested, right, or recommended to provide a rank between 1 and 5. But let's say that we have another child. Let's say their name is Ramon, who is 7 years old. And a social worker wants to assign a rank for feeding. So again, we would go to the column for 7 years old and then scroll to the right or go to the right under the service category that corresponds, right, for feeding. And there we see that the suggested ranking is 1 or 6, meaning that this child is expected to be able to feed himself independently without assistance and doesn't need any hours for feeding, or needs paramedical services, right? That's the suggestion, either 1 or 6. There's no in between. And that's what would be suggested for a social worker to assign. And going back to rank of 6, right, where paramedical services are concerned, what does that look like here, right, for feeding? A common example is if a person needs a G tube, which is generally ordered by a doctor and requires training and judgment to facilitate. So in this situation, Ramon, it would be suggested that a social worker provide a rank of 1 or 6, and no in between, right? That's the suggestion. But later on, we'll explore that idea a little bit more, that there's exceptions. Because the truth is that this guide these are guidelines, right? This is a recommendation, and it's not mandatory when an IHSS social worker assigns a rank to a child. In California, there is no specific law requiring this guideline to be followed. In other words, it's great in the sense that it tells you about when a child is expected to do something independently, but it's not mandatory to assign a rank of 1 where it makes that suggestion. And that's because every child is different, right? And they have to be assessed individually. And there are circumstances which are known as extraordinary needs that require a service or certain hours to be provided due to a child's disability or their impairment. And so you've probably heard that. I did mention that last week if you're able to be present last week when we spoke about IHSS, generally the program. We spoke about extraordinary need. So what does that mean exactly? So an extraordinary need is a need that's based on functional impairment due to a child's disability. And when that functional impairment goes beyond what is normally expected of a child of the same age without disability, without that same disability. So it's a comparison analysis, right? Extraordinary need. So depending on the difficulties that a child has, right, that are derived from the disability, are they different? Are they so different from another child of the same age without a disability? And if they are, then that would be considered an extraordinary need. And we'll a little bit later, we'll see how that looks like in practice. Okay, we can go to the next slide. And here you see the Vineland Maturity Scale. There's mention of parent-provider guide, which is no longer applicable. There was elimination to the parent-provider restrictions. But yeah, and so there's a Vinland maturity scale and the developmental guide here. Go to the next slide. Or if we can go to the URL link, yes, share the link and then maybe scroll to page 61 if we can. Give us a few moments. Okay, perfect. So here, which is page 61, I believe, of the packet, right? The URL link. Here we have the Vinland scale, maturity scale. So the Vinland maturity scale is an instrument used by IHSS social workers that they use as a guide to determine the expected capabilities of children without functional impairments. Which again, when we talk about function, we refer to physical and mental abilities. So the first column that you see on this chart is a task under the IHSS program. It could be domestic services, laundry, ambulation, feeding, so on and so forth. And the second column is the age. And the third column is the child's expected behavior at that age. Let's use the example of the 7-year-old boy, Ramon, where the social worker was assigning a rank for the feeding service, or was looking to assign a rank. So what is expected to be done as it relates to feeding a child, and we can go to the feeding category. Perfect, thank you. So here we have a list of what a child is expected to do independently at a certain age. So let's say Ramon, the 7-year-old boy, right, would be expected at 1 year old to eat with a spoon, to drink from a cup without any help, and to chew. At 2 years old, Ramon would be expected to eat with a fork. And at 8 years old, which let's say Ramon is about to turn 8, Ramon would be expected to take care of himself completely at the table. So these are things that the social worker will consider, right, when determining whether there's extraordinary need, or to determine what a functional index ranking would be, or a rank would be. So if you can go to the next page, the developmental guide. Thank you. So along with the Vinland maturity scale, which we just shared here, we also have the developmental guide, which reflects more or less the same information as a Vinland maturity scale, but it reinforces the idea that, children without a disability at a certain age would be expected to independently do certain tasks. Here we can look at the service of feeding, for example. So a 12 to a 14-month-old infant is supposed to be able to eat with a spoon. 10 to 12-month-old infant is supposed to be able to drink from a cup. At 3 to 4 years old, a child is expected to use a fork to eat. At 5 to 8 years old, a child can use a knife to cut food. And at 9 years old, the child is considered fully functional and able to feed themselves independently. Now, so this is what's expected, right, of a child without functional impairments. Now, let's say that Ramon is a child with autism and can do all of these things because of his disability. During feeding, Ramon doesn't eat what the rest of the family eats. Ramon is very selective about what he eats and is hesitant to eat unfamiliar foods. Let's say that Ramon doesn't eat at the same time as others and can't be left unattended. And let's say a parent must also provide a lot of prompting and guidance to Ramon to drink from a cup, because he can't concentrate and often drops a cup and spills drinks. And for that same reason, he can't use a knife. because it can pose a danger. Now, all of this is outside of what is expected of a child of the same age without autism. Remember that the age appropriate guidelines suggested a 1 or a 6, right? A social worker in that situation may state that the rank would be a 1 because, that child is expected to do certain tasks independently or unable to do them, right? But here there's an extraordinary need. We can demonstrate that there's an extraordinary need because Ramon's functional impairments due to his disability are beyond what would be expected of a child of the same age without a disability. There's an extraordinary need. And because it requires more time and more effort to help Ramon with feeding, a social worker should move beyond what is expected or suggested under the age-appropriate guidelines. Meaning that the social worker should be able to understand and comprehend that based on all the information, feeding is a service that is warranted. Can we go to the next page really quickly? Thank you. And as you see here on the screen, right, this is a age-appropriate guidelines. But if you look at the note section at the bottom, it makes reference to extraordinary need specifically. The first note at the bottom reads, all minors should be assessed a functional rank of 1 when identified above, unless extraordinary need is documented. Meaning, again, this is a guideline, and sometimes social workers will state, due to the child's age, this child is ineligible for a certain service, which is not true. The only thing that would apply to is domestic services, right? Domestic services will not be provided to children, but any other service can be provided if extraordinary need is demonstrated and documented. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. Not next slide, sorry, the next page in the packet. Give it a few moments. Okay, and that link will take you to this exact tool that you see here, which are known as the hourly task guidelines. Very colorful compared to the other documents. So here you see the hourly task guidelines. This is another tool IHSS social workers use in their assessments. We won't go into the number of hours in detail, but what we do want to point out is that for each rank that corresponds to a service category, the classification can be either low, medium, or high. Low, medium, or high refer to the intensity, right, required when assisting a person with a functional impairment in a service or category. A low classification means the person needs the least amount of time within that service. A high classification means that the maximum amount of time is needed due to the person's functional impairments related to a disability. So let's use another example. Let's say this time we have a different child, right? Let's say Maritza. Maritza's 10 years old. Let's say that the social worker did an assessment, and one of the categories she was reviewing was dressing, right? The dressing category for Maritza, a 10-year-old. So with this information, we can look at the age-appropriate guidelines tool. And I don't know, Lonnie, if we can scroll back up to the age-appropriate guidelines tool. Awesome, thank you. And this is what is recommended, right? A social worker to provide a certain ranking. So the social worker and the father both agree that Maritza needs substantial human assistance to perform the task. But let's say what a social worker, just using this chart, what would they be inclined to rank Maritza, who is 10 years old, in the category of feeding? So we know Maritza's 10, so we would go to 10. And under feeding, right, she could be ranked anywhere from 1 to a 6. Okay, great. So we don't need to demonstrate extraordinary need here. As long as we can show that Maritza cannot do this task independently, the task of dressing independently, then we know she could be ranked 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's say during the assessment, the social worker and the father is able to demonstrate that substantial human assistance is needed, which could mean that, due to her disability, she doesn't know how to button her clothing. She has physical disabilities that also make it very difficult for her to put on or take off her pants or dress. Maritza's unable to tie her shoes. Her father must do these things for her completely. She needs complete assistance. They're trying to teach Maritza how to do these things, but she's not yet able to do them independently. So let's say that the social worker and father both agree that Maritza needs substantial human assistance to perform the task. So can we go back to the first page, the functional index rankings, very top? I think it would be the second page, Lonnie, where it has a list of rank 1 through 5, which is page 4 in the packet, I believe. What the various levels, rank 1, independent, rank 2. Great, thank you. So with the information we're given, we know that Maritza requires substantial human assistance. So what rank would we provide Maritza under the situation? And if you can actually put in the chat what rank you think would be warranted here, that would be great. We'll give people a few moments to put in the chat. And just to remind you, right, Maritza doesn't know how to button her clothing. She has physical disabilities that also make it very difficult for her to put on and take off her pants, her dress. She isn't able to tie her shoes. Her father must dress her completely. She needs substantial human assistance. So if the audience can put in the chat what rank they believe Maritza can be designated with these facts. A rank 1, rank 2, rank 3, rank 4, rank 5. We'll give it a few moments.
So far, I'm seeing 5s and 4s in the chat.
Okay, great. That's good. It means that everybody's in agreement that a rank of 2 or 3 would not be warranted here. Great. Okay, Lonnie, can we go back to the section where we were? Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so a rank of 4 in dressing. So here we see that it could be a rank of low, mid, high, and that'll, again, that's why these assessments are very important, because a social worker will also have to designate the intensity that applies here, which can be low, mid, or high. I would make the argument that the rank should be a rank of 4, high. So under dressing, a social worker could provide 2 hours and 20 minutes here. So as a general rule, right, depending on the functional impairments in the child, as long as you can demonstrate that the child cannot do something independently, another rank can be provided. Unless extraordinary need is warranted, there the argument is a little bit more difficult, right? You have to explain how the need is far beyond what would normally be expected of a child of the same age without a disability. So it requires a little bit more in the analysis. But if you look at the age appropriate guidelines, if there's a rank 1 through 5 or 6, then generally, as long as you can demonstrate that a person cannot do something independently, a rank of 2, 3, 4, or 5 should be ascribed to a child. So another thing so thank you everybody for putting that in the chat. A rank of 4 would be warranted here just based on the information that we have. So another thing I do want to mention about this guide is that there are also more open-ended times for certain services, meaning that there's no recommendation for how long a task can be done for, right, for an individual. There's only a maximum amount of time that can be provided. So there's no low, there's no mid, there's no high, and there's no specific rank. For example, for domestic services, if you see towards the bottom, services with time guidelines. So without adjustments or proration, right, the maximum number of hours for domestic services, for example, might be up to 6 hours per month. Same applies for shopping for food, right, where a person can have one hour per week. For other shopping or errands, 30 minutes per week. Laundry, 1 hour per week. If you have in-unit washer and dryer, or a washer dryer in the home, but if you have to go to a laundromat, for example, that would be increased by another 30 minutes every week. So these hourly task guidelines are what social workers will use to determine how much time an individual will receive in any particular service. Okay, so we can go to the next page. And so we'll talk a little bit about self-assessment. Like I mentioned earlier, DRC, a few of my colleagues developed this self-assessment template that can be used for in-home assessments or reassessments. And this is to support the argument, right, that a child or a person should receive a certain rank based on the information that's provided. And something else that can be done, right, is that you can provide additional documents to a social worker, right? You can provide school evaluations, supporting letters from doctors, individualized education programs or IEPs, or individual program plans like IPPs, right? If you have a regional center client. So all of this information can be provided to a social worker, and they have to consider it all. I've heard some situations sometimes where a social worker will come to in-home assessment. Families will want to provide additional documentation, and the social worker will say, "Oh, we don't need that. That's okay. I have all the information I need." Don't allow that. Insist that they take those documents, right? Because if they're relevant and important and they help support the argument that a person's rank should be higher than it already is, or if the social worker is initially providing a rank, all of that should be considered. And that's particularly helpful, right? Because if in the future you would like to appeal a notice of action, those documents would be important, right? You can tell a judge or a county representative, look, I provided all these documents to the social worker, so they must have been considered, right? It's an obligation that social workers use any information available to make a determination or to do their analysis or to ascribe a rank and time. So yes, so if a social worker does not want to take documents, insist, right? And kind of, again, that goes to whether it's an initial assessment, in-home assessment, or a reassessment. So here, we can look at this first page here of the self-assessment. So the first part of this assessment is a summary of the hours that are needed, which are first calculated in the second part of this self-assessment. But if one already has hours authorized by the county, those amounts can be entered here on the second column. And then the third column would be where you would provide the hours that you believe are necessary for the IHSS recipient. And then towards the bottom, can we go to the next page? A little bit lower. And here, right under the blue row that you see here, it gives you a formula of how the monthly hours are calculated. So can we scroll down a little bit more? Great, thank you, right there. So, right, a lot of these services are calculated on a weekly basis. So, for those services that are calculated weekly, generally that is multiplied by 4.33, and that will determine the monthly hours. So not multiplied by 4, it's multiplied by 4.33, which is 4 1/3. So there will be an amount, and then what they do is they add domestic service hours or domestic services, right? The hours for domestic services, which are generally provided on a monthly basis, so up to 6 hours. So then they'll add that, and then you'll have a final amount for the monthly IHSS hours that an individual will receive. And then here on this, we can scroll a little bit lower. Here we have links to various tools, right? The tools and guides that IHSS social workers use in completing these in-home assessments and reassessments. You can scroll down to the and here, the second part of the self-assessment that some of my colleagues developed here contains a detailed description of each service. And that's because each service can include several activities within it, right? The definition it can be quite expansive. So these are here for your reference when completing the self-assessment. There's also a space below, right, where you see there where the parent can note the classification, the functional index ranking for each service. They can state what it is now and what they think is the correct rank. There's also a space there to provide a summary where the parent can make a note of any extraordinary need if it applies, or to provide a description of the functional limitations, right? What difficulties does a child have or does a person have in completing a task? What do they need? Complete physical human assistance? Do they just need verbal prompting? That's where you can provide all that information. And you can certainly use the Vinland maturity scale and the developmental guide to kind of help you make that determination, right? You can state, let's say, going back to the feeding example, my child is 8 and is unable to eat with a fork, is unable to eat with a spoon, is unable to drink unassisted from a glass, cannot chew easily, right? You can certainly make those observations in that space for where the summary part is. And at the end, right, that's where you can provide the ranking and the time that you think is appropriate, depending on what the rank is, right? Whether it's mid, high, or low. Not including things such as domestic services, right? Where there's a maximum amount of time that can be provided. You don't have to state what rank you think that category or that service is warrants, but you can certainly explain, right? The person cannot brush, cannot broom or mop or vacuum independently and needs verbal prompting, right? You can certainly include that information. Now, okay. So actually, let's go to feed. Are we at feeding? We can go to the category for feeding so that we can kind of go over it. And we'll read a little bit about the description. I know sometimes it's difficult to locate because it's, oh, there we are. Oh, wait, no, feeding. I think lower. So I'm trying to look at them. Probably make this screen bigger. Yeah, it's where the non-medical personnel services are. There we go. Oh my gosh, and I'm purple, aren't I? Okay, this happens a lot. Let me try to. Okay, there. I'm not purple again. That happens to me a lot. I don't know. It makes me look like what an Oompa Loompa. Okay, so let's go over feeding, right? So we're going to review this section together and then go over, we'll have a sample that we will provide of how this area can be filled out. So feeding can include the following. We have a definition here. And these definitions, where you see reference to the MPP and then 30.757.14, MPP stands for Manual Policies and Procedures. And these are the regulations under the that the IHSS program uses in order to operate, right? So here we have an example of what feeding would be. And this is according to regulations or the law. So feeding here can include assistance with consuming food and assuring that a person is taking adequate fluids. It consists of feeding or related assistance to individuals who can't feed themselves or who require other assistance with special devices for feeding in order to help them eat or to drink liquids. Here, one, right? So feeding tasks include assisting with reaching for, picking up, and grasping utensils in a cup, cleaning a recipient's face and hands, right? Sometimes that's something that's not considered, but it should be. It also includes washing and drying a person's hands before and after feeding them. Feeding tasks do not include the following. So this is important to remember, right? Cutting food into bite-sized pieces or puring food, because that can be considered preparation of meals or meal preparation, which is a separate service. And here 3, you see the time guideline range for feeding shall be as follows, unless the recipient's needs require an exception or an extraordinary need. Remember, going back to the age-appropriate guidelines, there's going to be, for the younger ages, right, where a social worker will be suggested that they provide a rank of 1, meaning no time is going to be provided. But if an exception applies here, extraordinary need applies, then a social worker can provide time. Okay, so now let's go to the self-assessment. The sample, I think, would be which is, and here we're using the hypothetical of Mario, a young child who's receiving IHSS services. So they're already receiving IHSS services. So as you see here, right, the first page is a summary of the hours that the county has authorized. And the hours on the third column are the hours that the parent is requesting based on what they observe and what they gathered, right? The information that they've gathered. Well, the truth is, right, parents, for example, in the case of Mario, are very aware of his needs, so they can adequately state what rank would be warranted here and what time should be provided. And just for this presentation today, right, we'll focus on the feeding category, where if you see here, the county has already authorized 6 hours and the parent is requesting more time. So if we can navigate to the section for food in the self-assessment, please. Okay, great. So if you see here, the parent has a functional index ranking 4, right? Which is what the social worker or the county has provided, right? They think that substantial human assistance is needed, but here the parent is going to make the argument that Mario cannot, with or without human assistance, perform this task independently. So this is what the parent has observed in the summary, right? Mario is able to feed himself some food such as bananas, crackers, potato chips, any foods that are cut up into bite-sized pieces, but can't hold utensils, cannot hold a cup or glasses, and requires a father's assistance. When Mario uses utensils, a provider will place his hand over his hands to assist him to pick up the utensil. And the task consists of 30 minutes for each meal, with the exception of feeding him a snack. The snack is provided 1 time per day, can take 10 minutes. Mario has behaviors while he eats, He can become combative when he is not fed fast enough, wants a diaper change or whatever other reason. He will bite himself, his clothing, and attempts to hit the person closest to him while he's being fed. The provider has to stop and calm him down. Mario eats very slowly and at times stares into space or stops to clap or laugh. He has to be redirected substantially. So the provider has included time, right? The amount of time that it takes to perform a service. Here, feeding, right? So 30 minutes, 3 meals a day, that's 90 minutes. Every day, times 7 days a week, that's 630 minutes. Plus a snack. Sometimes that's a service that's often ignored, but should be included, right? So feeding can include breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks. And snacks here, right? Feeding a snack can take 10 minutes, seven days a week, which is 70 minutes weekly. So then, there's math there. They calculate the amount of minutes per week, which amounts to 11 hours and 35 minutes, which essentially tells us that a rank of 4 is not appropriate here, and a rank of 5 should be provided. And if you're unsure, you can look at those hourly task guidelines, right, to see what a social worker would be inclined to provide, and then take it from there, right? The first thing, of course, is that you want to figure out what ranking should be ascribed. And so, yes. So that's generally what you would do for any of those categories. And again, you can provide documentation along with this self-assessment, and we will provide to participants today. You will receive a copy of this assessment that you can fill out. And it's helpful because if you need to appeal in the future, you have this already, right? Because you can tell the county representative or an administrative law judge that you provided this information to the social worker. But it turns out that they probably failed to consider it, right? In addition to any documentations that you provided. And what I've seen is helpful with documentation is sometimes provide copies. Don't ever provide originals. Copies are completely okay, right, to provide. But if possible, highlight areas that you think are relevant. Let's say in the IPP or the individual program plan, there's information about the home situation, right? Even functional impairments. There's information about where an individual, it's spoken about kind of safety awareness, and that goes to maybe protective supervision, for example, where if an IPP states this individual has these behaviors and they pose a risk to their safety or health, you can include that, highlight that, right? That way, a social worker cannot simply state, "Oh, I reviewed it, but I didn't see it," right? I've heard that in the past, which never works, by the way. But it's good to kind of highlight in those documents what areas are relevant as to the functional impairments of a child or the individual or the IHSS recipient. So if we can go to the next, right here, the resources. Can we scroll down a little bit? Here we have a few resources that can be very helpful, right, with the assessment process. The first one is IHSS Training Academy material. So IHSS social workers, as part of their onboarding, they're provided training, right? They're supposed to be knowledgeable about certain aspects of the IHSS program. And so all the training materials that they use and refer to are made public. So all of us have access to those documents. And here's a link to those documents, the training materials that this California Department of Social Services has developed for IHSS social workers as part of their training. And we will, during appeals and hearings, we do refer to these documents because they're the ones that social workers rely on as part of their training. So sometimes, a social worker will say, well, I wasn't aware of this. And then we'll point to that information in the training materials and state, well, you were trained in this particular section, right? So yeah, so we sometimes do rely on them for that matter, but very good to refer to anyhow. We also have, and that's, you say IHSS 101 or IHSS 102, those are the training courses that the social workers will take. And then here you also have a document for disability awareness that social workers also use or have made reference to, which is important, right? Because as a reminder, right, IHSS is a program for people who are blind, who have a disability, or who are 65 years of age or older. So they have to have an awareness of disability and how it can impact an individual's life and how that could inform the hours and ranks that a social worker provides. We also have medical implications that provide more information, medical implications that social workers should consider, right, when they evaluate or assess individuals. Here we also have a link to the State Hearings Division, which again provides more information. And again, if a person disagrees with the notice of action, right, the determination that a social worker or the county has made, everybody has a right to due process, meaning they can appeal a decision. And that's part of a different process, right, where you would submit an appeal. And then the appeal is processed, and then a county representative is assigned who represents the county or the social worker. And then ultimately, if nothing is resolved at that stage, then it would proceed to a hearing where a neutral decision maker or an administrative law judge will decide if the county was incorrect in its decision or not, and then correct anything that may have been incorrect in the notice of action, right? Services that were, or hours that were received. Okay, great. So I think with that, I know that there were, I think if this is being recorded, I think we could pause the recording so that we can take questions
Okay,
from the audience.
great. I'm going to stop the recording now.